I helped ruin a bridezilla's wedding. She had been stealing from others for years, and I couldn't stand it anymore, so I did something sneaky. It ended with her looking like a total pauper, and I couldn't have been happier. I've known Pat for ages. We grew up together, and as far back as I can remember, she always dreamed of having 5 kids and living in a cute house with a white picket fence. But things changed when we went to college. She started acting differently, kind of like she was trying to take advantage of everyone. I just couldn't trust her, so I slowly stopped being friends with her. She's a manipulator, always trying to get what she wants, and sometimes she's downright pushy. I always found her attempts to be cute really annoying. She'd waddle around like a penguin when she wanted people to feel sorry for her. She always played the victim, trying to make everyone think she was the underdog. I've never met anyone so terrible and silly at the same time. I moved on with my life and was happy to be free of Pat for years. But one day, she found me on Facebook and sent me a friend request. Out of politeness, I accepted. Pat became the ultimate lenient mom. Her 5 kids did whatever they wanted, and she never said a word to them. She tried to force me to be close to her daughters and even made them call me Auntie. She would show up at my house uninvited with all of them. She called constantly, trying to take up all my time. Then, she started showing up at my job. I finally put my foot down and set some limits, but she tried to find ways around them. It was a total nightmare. My husband and I decided to throw a party at the community center. It's a place where we try to help homeless people, and we actually prefer helping strangers than dealing with people who are selfish and self-centered. We're always willing to help people out, but we've run into some people who try to trick us into helping them. It's like they just want something for nothing. There are other people who volunteer at the community center. One woman helps women get their prom and wedding dresses for free. The place is a real farm, owned by a sweet old couple. They have a barn, a big space for events, and a beautiful green field with a little pond and some chickens. They charge for weddings and things, but it's free for groups who want to meet up and do things for the community. Pat has always been mad at her husband because he wants her to go back to work. He has to work 3 jobs because Pat wants to be a stay-at-home mom and have 5 kids. But he was getting close to 45 years old and was worried about retiring. He didn't want to have more kids, but she wouldn't stop until she had 5. And guess what? She did it. She really loves being pregnant and the attention she gets. She had at least 1 miscarriage between each baby. Pat practically moved into our group. She didn't miss a single event. I hated having her around, but our group is open to everyone, and she always volunteered to help organize things. The only problem was, her kids were horrible. We have a place where people can party, but her kids would sneak into my bedroom. We had to keep a close eye on them the whole time, and it totally ruined our party. Later, I tried to talk to her about their bad behavior, but she wouldn't let me say anything. All she did was talk about herself. She even asked if her kids could come back and use our pool. I never answered her. I didn't want to say, "No, I don't want your kids at my house." When summer came, Pat called me to tell me her middle daughter was bored and wanted to spend a whole week at our house. I politely declined, explaining that my husband and I both work and we can't have people staying with us. But Pat didn't listen. Her daughter called me on the weekend, calling me Auntie, and saying, "Mom says you invited me to spend summer with you." I tried to be kind and clear up the misunderstanding, but her daughter just hung up on me. Then, Pat's Facebook post started. To raise some red flags. I saw cryptic posts, and her friends were commenting about how Pat asked someone to watch her kids for just a few hours, but ended up leaving them there all day. Another friend complained that Pat had asked them to be patient and wait until she could pay them back some money, but then she went out spending money on herself on a girls' night. All of these public complaints seemed like a cry for help, like they were tired of Pat's behavior. Some bad things started happening. One time, Pat volunteered to wrap presents for underprivileged kids. We wanted to give some nice gifts, and some expensive toys and games just disappeared. Later, we found them under Pat's Christmas tree, according to a post by her mother-in-law. No one could prove it, but it really made me mad. Another time, my daughter called me crying and asking me to pick her up. She'd been at Pat's daughter Casey's birthday party, and she'd been ignored the whole time because she didn't get Casey an expensive video game. Casey practically demanded it. My daughter had asked, but I said no. We would buy her a nice, thoughtful gift. So when I picked her up, my daughter was sitting alone in the living room while Casey and her friends were outside. The stories about Pat and her family kept growing. The owners of the farm, the ones who owned the community center, locked their gates whenever they didn't have guests. Pat kept driving onto the farm whenever she felt like it, and her kids would scream, bothering wedding guests, throw rocks at the fish in the pond, and chase the geese around. They even stiffed another mom on a lunch bill and then claimed they were struggling financially. Other parents hated her because she was so competitive and mean to everyone. When my daughter turned 13, I let her wear my grandmother's ring. It's not super fancy, but it's vintage, and girls these days like that boho look. My grandma gave it to me when I was a teenager, so I gave it to my daughter. She could wear it for her birthday. But my daughter seemed really quiet and distracted after that. She didn't want to go to school, and my husband and I became worried. She wouldn't talk to us about it, and my other kids didn't know what was going on either. We talked to her teachers, but they said nothing was different at school. My husband and I thought she might be being bullied, but she wasn't giving us any clues. She's always so happy and nice to everyone. She never has any problems with other kids. So I called the mom of my daughter's best friend, Natalie. Natalie told us what was happening. It turned out Casey, Pat's oldest daughter, and my daughter had become friends. I knew they hung out, but I wasn't happy about it. I thought their age gap, 17 and 13, wasn't right. I would have preferred my daughter spending time with friends her own age. Casey is beautiful and really smart. But she's also very full of herself. She asked my daughter if she could try on the ring, and then refused to give it back. She claimed she'd lost it, but said she would look for it. My daughter was heartbroken. She kept asking for her ring back. Casey just started ignoring her and then told everyone my daughter was trying to steal her ring. Some kids at school believed Casey, and now Casey was wearing my daughter's ring like it was her own. That's bullying if I ever saw it. I felt so bad that I couldn't get my daughter to open up to me and tell me the truth. When she finally did, she burst into tears. I was heartbroken for her, and I was furious at Casey. What a nasty girl. After school that day, I went straight to Pat's car. Casey was about to get in, and I asked if I could talk to her. I took Casey's hand and asked to see her ring. Casey froze and tried to make a fist, but I kept asking. She yelled, "Mom!" And Pat tried to get out of the car. I slipped the ring off Casey's finger. She has really small hands and was wearing the ring on her index finger. First, Pat started yelling at me. Then, I told her I could see the inscription on the band my grandma's maiden name. She tried to say my daughter had loaned it to her daughter. Then she said she'd bought it. I knew that wasn't true. I warned them that I knew Casey was being mean to my daughter. Pat called me later and yelled at me for a long time. She said she was trying to raise a strong, independent daughter, and that I was being overprotective. She never apologized for Casey stealing my daughter's ring. Pat's husband, Hank, is like a doormat. Pat completely wears the pants in their relationship. He always does what she says just to keep the peace. She's a bully who would ignore him and withhold affection if he didn't get things her way, even in public. That's how she got him to have kids number 4 and number 5. She wouldn't stop bugging him until he agreed, even after she left him for 2 months. When she was pregnant, she was a nightmare. She expected everyone to treat her like the only person who'd ever been pregnant. She'd wheel herself around in a wheelchair almost immediately after she got pregnant, and then get really sick every weekend so she could send the kids to their friends or family and rest. Pat was constantly picking on Hank. She would leave town with the kids, and Hank would look so miserable, sitting on his porch and drinking, or just looking all alone. That's how she got away with leaving her job. He had no say in anything, so he was trying to keep their marriage together. Everyone loved Hank, but they all hated Pat. Hank liked to talk to people, but he seemed afraid of what Pat would say. My husband said that Hank was starting to get really depressed and messed up mentally. Our friend Lena runs the wedding and prom dress program. It's not complicated. They collect dresses from donations, eBay, and designer sales. They keep the really fancy dresses for more than one bride to wear. Sometimes a bride will pay $50, but most of the time, they get the dresses for free. Pat got involved, and Lena kept her on because they never had any problems, and she only had to pack and ship the dresses. Then, Pat decided to have a vow renewal. And her bridezilla Karenzilla attitude went into overdrive. She bullied another couple into giving up their wedding date at the farm because she wanted to renew her vows on the same date as their original wedding. They were furious, so they booked a different venue. The farm owners were mad too because Pat was already costing them money. She had negotiated a discount because she couldn't afford it, but promised to do some maintenance work around the farm. But she never did. Pat really wanted a certain dress that was already promised to another bride. Lena told her she would have to pay for it herself. So Pat played it cool and shipped the wrong dress. She insisted it was the right one even though Lena had notes about the right dress. The other bride was so nice about it, even though she was really disappointed. But what made me really mad was that I picked out that dress and bought it for $40 at a garage sale. It was Leah's money, not mine. The dress was vintage ankle-length, white, lots of lace, and a great deal. When we confronted Pat about it, she played the same "it's mine" card that Casey used. We felt terrible for the other bride, so we did our best to get her something nice to wear. This girl had worked hard to get her life back together. She had been on welfare and got her high school diploma, and she was working on getting a job as a nail technician. And here was Pat stealing her wedding dress. Pat never admitted to messing up, but we knew she had. Lena finally stopped letting Pat work at the warehouse. Their last phone call ended with Pat bringing up the other bride's past. It didn't matter. She just said, "This conversation is over. It's my dress, and you were mistaken." That was weeks before the other bride's wedding. Pat went all out for her wedding. She spent way too much money. She hired a caterer for some snacks and drinks, but the wedding invitations asked people to bring specific dishes for a brunch-style reception. Either she ran out of money or she was just trying to mooch. I can picture her waddling around like a penguin, practically begging everyone to bring food. It makes me cringe. There's nothing wrong with a potluck wedding, but don't you need to be close to your guests to ask them to bring food? She even sent me an invitation. I told everyone I wouldn't go because I felt uncomfortable about being told what to bring, and I thought she was expecting a cash gift on top of it all. Some of the older ladies in our group agreed. They said they wouldn't say no to Pat ahead of time because she's a bully and they didn't want a confrontation. The night before Pat's vow renewal, Lena called me. She was at the center to close up after Saturday night bingo. Pat was being super friendly, like she always is when things are going her way. Lena peeked into Pat's dress bag and saw the exact same dress that was supposed to be the other bride's. Pat was busy supervising the decorations and didn't notice. Karens always think they're in charge. They expect everyone to bend over backwards for them. They underestimate people and think everyone's an idiot. Lena is super straightforward and not afraid to speak her mind. She told me she would just ruin the dress. After all, it was hers, so she could do whatever she wanted. If Pat wanted to sue, she'd have to prove it was hers. But the dress was identical. Even the little marks on the inside and the tags were the same. The numbers used to keep track of the dresses matched perfectly. Pat had gotten the dress altered. She had some extra beads added and dyed it a darker cream color. But it was the same dress. Lena and I snuck into the farm before it closed. Brides are allowed to stay in a small bedroom there, for a small fee. That way, they don't have to drive all the way out to the farm on their wedding day. The little chapel is really beautiful. I don't know how she paid for it, but it was full of flowers and stuff. I thought about bringing some ink to spill on the dress, but Lena wanted something worse, like a nasty surprise. Ink would be too obvious. If Pat saw it before the wedding, she might find another dress. She needed to trust the dress was fine. So Lena went into the bathroom and cut out the back panel of the dress. Then, she put it back on the hanger, zipped the bag, and we left through the emergency door. I was really angry that Pat and her daughter would steal from people they think are weaker. The wedding was at 9 a.m. Pat called me at 7 a.m., but I didn't answer. Then, I picked up at 8 a.m. I was curious to see if she suspected anything. Pat was frantic. She was crying because half of her dress was missing. I purposely made her explain what had happened, just like she does to other people, and kept interrupting and delaying the conversation. She asked if I could lend her my wedding dress. I said no, I couldn't. Then she asked if I would help her find a dress. I just reminded her that all the shops in town were closed on Sundays, and the ones that were open were an hour away. The farm is already an hour away from town. To find a new dress, she would have to try it on, and then it would need to be steamed. Even if the dress was ready to wear, it would take at least 2 hours to get everything done. She asked me to pick a dress for her, but who would pay for it? Even if a shop was open and could find a dress, it would cost even more money. Plus, these shops don't open until 9:30 or 10 a.m. at the earliest. She needed to clear the farm by 12 p.m. for the next event. Pat was freaking out and mumbling something that I didn't understand. She hung up on me and called Lena. She asked Lena to bring her anything she could find. Lena and I ended up giving her a dress that was way too big and smelled musty. Pat was really mad and upset. She even tried to wear her silk bridal slip as a wedding dress, but it was so obvious, and it looked cheap. She tried to get Casey to wear her own dress, but Casey refused, asking if she was supposed to attend the wedding naked. She had a point, and besides, Casey is pretty tiny. The dress needed a petticoat to make the skirt fuller, but Lena didn't have one. The dress dragged on the ground, and Pat had to keep pulling it up. She walked down the aisle with one hand on her bouquet and the other one trying to hold up her dress. It looked all droopy and weird, and they used a bunch of safety pins to try to fix the sleeves and neckline. The whole thing was messy. She looked uncomfortable and out of place during the ceremony. Only a few people showed up, but that wasn't out of revenge. That's just how people react to her bad attitude. The dress looked awful. The reception was all fancy, with beautiful decorations and a really nice cake. But the bridezilla had the worst dress ever. I didn't stay for the reception, but I heard she was so disappointed that she spent the whole time sulking. There wasn't even any dancing or speeches. She changed into a shirt and leggings because her dress was so uncomfortable. Everyone talked about how she put on flip-flops and just walked around until she ordered the ushers to start packing up the chairs an hour after the reception started. She basically kicked everyone out, and they never even cut the cake. Pat wasn't the same after the wedding. She wasn't as loud and avoided everyone. I think she was mad that no one rushed to help her, not even her own family who had come in from out of town. Her husband finally reached his limit and got some help. He had been working so hard, coming home to clean the house while Pat used her kids as an excuse to spend money like crazy. Hank even had to do the kids' homework because Pat never had time or patience. She refused to get a part-time job so the kids could go to after-school programs and get help with their homework. The therapy seemed to help Hank because when Pat left with the kids, he didn't look as distraught. He started riding his bike and relaxing while he mowed his lawn. He told my husband that he had thought about killing himself after their third child was born. When Pat came back, he stuck to his new routine but was more interested in going out alone and doing things for himself. We started seeing Pat by herself a lot. Hank was around less and less, and he eventually moved back in with his parents. He filed for divorce because of emotional abuse, but I don't think he won. They reached a settlement, and Pat wasn't allowed to get close to him or interact with him, except about the kids. I don't even know if Pat figured out what happened to her dress or who did it. She started avoiding the community center and going to social events. She unfriended me on Facebook, and unfriended most of the people at school and the center. Here's the short story. A demanding, selfish bridezilla stole a wedding dress from a woman who really needed it. The woman who actually owned the dress ruined her big day.